Okay, well, I think we are ready to get started, Jimmy.
All right.
So welcome everyone to our webinar, Attracting the Perfect Tenant. We're going to be talking today about going from hunched to data-backed confidence in your leasing presentations. In the next 30 minutes, I want to give you everything I know about how to develop an irresistible story for your center so that you can ultimately sign more leases, but also develop trust with the retailers and make sure that those retailers perform extremely well in your center, which helps their fleet, your relationship, and ultimately levels everybody up. At the end, I am going to show you how our segmentation persona live can help accelerate that process as well. My name is Leighton Faust. I am the CEO of Spatial, and I am joined here by Jimmy Chase, who is our head of marketing and design. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, Lyden. Good to be here.
Cool. See some folks coming in for the chat. Yep, you can get a recording afterwards. And welcome from Anaheim, California. Cool. Well, let's get into this, and just a little housekeeping before we get in. There's two little things at the bottom here that you can input some text in. One is chat. So I'm going to be interacting with you guys throughout this presentation. When I'm asking you questions, just go ahead and put that in the chat. If you have questions that you want to go through at the end, put that in the Q&A. We're going to have some time for Q&A in the end. If we don't get to all the questions, that also allows us to keep those questions and respond back afterwards. Okay. Just a little bit of background on Spatial AI and Persona Live. We have been around doing segmentation, geographic segmentation market research since 2016. We released the Persona Live segmentation in 2021, and we primarily work with retailers and commercial real estate firms. We have over 500 different organizations directly and through our partners that are now using the Persona Live segmentation. And then we get a really interesting perspective on the segmentation landscape, especially as it relates to leasing scenarios, because we talk with both the retailers and support them as well as the landlords. So we get to see that perspective from both ways. And a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you guys today comes from a number of interviews I have done in my research leading up to this webinar from both the property owners that use our data and retailers. So I get to see this from both sides, and I'll be sharing that with you today. So going through the agenda, part one is talking about attracting the perfect tenant. Part two is about how to use Persona Live to accelerate that process. So before we even get into this, there are some basics that a potential tenant or retailer would need to know about your location before signing a lease. And that would include checkboxes like population. Is there enough population to support the concept, the demographics of that population, the physical attributes of the center, and the financial considerations. So as a property owner and as a researcher, you might already check all four of those boxes, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sign that lease. Or you might only check a few of these boxes. How do you break through that tenant? If you have a hunch and you know that this is a great property for them, how do you tell the true story of your location so that you can show a growth trajectory for both your property and that brand? One of the main problems is deals are way too often lost based on a retailer's demographic criteria. They have a couple sets of criteria in their head. If you don't meet them or exceed them, sometimes they just throw you to the side. The reality is that demographics are not the whole story. And as a property owner, you've probably seen this where you have a tenant that chooses the wrong location. Maybe there are two locations that are demographically the same, but they perform very differently. How do you capture the story that's not demographics in a way that helps them understand the true value of your center? Some of the ways this problem can come out in symptoms is missed shots. So a tenant that picks the wrong location, and then eventually that location just doesn't do very well. And that was a missed shot that could have been a win for them. Something you may run into as a barrier is as you are talking in your leasing presentations, you can tell that potential tenant, there's something that just has them hung up Maybe there's one characteristics of the site that you just don't have, and they're not hearing the rest of what you're saying. I don't know if you guys use Max, but there's a spinning pinwheel of death. It's kind of like that. They're just stopped and they can't move forward. How do you break through that? Or you might feel like all the research that you've brought to the table is just getting thrown in the wastebasket anyways, because they're thinking, oh, this person is just incented to show me that this property is good. So what reason do I have to trust their research over my research or my gut feel about this location? So how do we break through that? I want to share with you guys today the breakthrough story model, and it is a result of a ton of research and a ton of interviews with retailers and property owners on how they both see this and how they both find particular sets of data valuable. Okay, so this is the story breakthrough model, and there's three components to this model. Component number one is gravity. Can you demonstrate that there is a gravity to your center, meaning the client's potential prospects are actually coming to that center? And I might just go ahead and do that again because I'm going to need some more space on the top. So this is gravity. Component number two is demand. Can you demonstrate that there's demand for that concept or product in the trade area? Component number three is trust. Do they trust your research? And each of these components have three concepts related to them. So the first component in gravity is customers. So this is demonstrating to that tenant that not only are there demographic target customers in that location, but also these people are behaviorally like your best customers. Second is co-tenancy. So one of the best indications that the customers are actually there is that there are other co-tenants that are synergistic with your brand. So for example, if you're Patagonia and you know that Athleta is already in that location and you know that's a great co-tenant for you, this is a good indication that that is drawing the gravity of those people. They're not just in the trade area, they're actually coming to that center. And the last is competition. So this develops trust. They're going to ask about competition. And if you already know the trade area of the competition, and this could be cannibalization as well, where you can see, is there overlap? Is there not overlap? That is really going to be helpful to them and how you see it. And the second thing is competition is not always bad. Like maybe for a grocery concept, it's always bad. But let's say that you're working with a brand that has a minority market share and there's competition of the majority market share owner. That might actually be a good thing because that is a guarantee that the type of customers they want are already coming there and that they feel they can compete, they can get a piece of that pie. So that's gravity. The second is demonstrating there is demand for that product or service, and that demand is growing along a growth trajectory. One good way to do that is through foot traffic, which is becoming much more used. But 90% of property owners are doing this wrong in the way that I've talked to retailers. There's a right way to position foot traffic and a wrong way to position foot traffic. You can say there's 50,000 visits to this property, and that means absolutely nothing to the retailer. What they need is contextualized foot traffic. What does that mean? So in our Patagonia example, if you know that a great tenant for Patagonia is breweries in Athleta, if you can say, hey, there's 50,000 visitors to this property, and it is Athleta's #2 performing location in the nation, and it's by the #1 brewery in the state. All of a sudden, that 50,000 foot traffic becomes contextualized and is actually meaningful to the retailer. So the next part of demand is growth. So can you tell a growth story about your center? And growth could be a number of things. So it could be growth in population. It could be growth in new developments. It could be growth in income or discretionary spending, or it could be growth in their specific customer segments. So can you tell a growth story? And then last but not least is analogs. These are really important. So analogs are the other properties that your tenant is performed well. So if you're doing research on a tenant and you look at their top 5 performing properties, step one is saying, hey, our property is very similar to these best performing properties. But if you want to bring this up the next level, you can say across your top 5 performing properties, these are the components that are really driving success in those properties. And we have those, and we actually have even more of those components, whether it's discretionary spending or total population, et cetera, is showing that you are similar or better than the analogs. And the last here is trust. Trust has to do with your history with that retailer. The more at-bats you've had the retailer, the more they've been able to develop trust with you, trust your research. And if you've delivered wins to them in the past, that's always going to help. A second part of this is alignment. Most people don't think about alignment. So alignment is looking at the values of the brands that you're working with. For example, Patagonia has values around outdoor interests. Can you show that your trade area has a similar aligned set of values as that potential tenant? Patagonia shows up all the time in locations you wouldn't expect because they're showing up where they know these people's values align. And that's really going the next step. And the last here, don't have a lot of space for them, is operations flexibility, because let's be honest, that always does help. Okay. So that's part of the model. Let's look at the intersections of these. So let's say you're demonstrating a lot of demand and you're showing gravity to the center, but you don't have a lot of trust. What does that result in? I call that a transactional relationship. It might work for them, but they don't really trust your research and they're just going to take it. Okay. What about when you're showing a lot of gravity and they really trust you, but you are not showing a growth story where demand is increasing for their product or service? I would call that fragile. Because if you're not showing a growth story, anytime where like COVID-19, for example, happens, that's the first part of their portfolio that they are closing and booting. So that's fragile revenue. If your customer is not growing with you, they are growing out of you. So you need to try to show a growth story. And then the last, if you have demand and trust, but you're not showing gravity, really, that's just making a bet. Because who knows? Hopefully it works, but we don't know if our customer's actually showing up there. But when you're doing all 3 of these things, what that gives you is what I call resilient revenue. And that is the breakthrough story model. So let's go through 3 hot principles that will accelerate all 3 of these things. So principle number 1, I already talked about this. Make sure that your data is contextualized. I don't know if you've ever put one of these jigsaw puzzles together. It takes a lot of patience, but when you look at them individually and you have them all spread out, you're like, what is that? So you kind of try with, start with the edges first. But when you put that last puzzle piece in, before it meant nothing to you, but when you place it in there, you can see, oh, that's actually the top of the mountain, at that little white piece is meaningful to you for the first time. The same thing when you're talking to the potential tenants or the retailers, you need to place it within the context of, just like Patagonia, this is the #2 performing athleta in the nation and the #1 brewery in the state, and we have 50,000 foot traffic visits. #2 is no pressure, no diamonds. So if you're not getting tough feedback or questions from your client, they're not listening. But when you are getting tough questions, this gives you an opportunity to develop trust with that potential tenant. And when you're getting that feedback, there's a model that you can follow, which is feel, felt, and then found. I understand totally how you feel. A lot of our potential tenants have felt the same way, and what they found is Athleta has their #1 location here. Feel, felt, found. And that also gives you an opportunity to go back and answer those questions later if you can't answer them. And one example I have is in one of the interviews I did was with a company called Avanti Research. And they had a potential tenant that is a luxury tenant looking at a location in Florida, but they were a little spooked because there wasn't a high amount of permanent residents in that location because they're snowbirds. But then what they were able to show is that there is the highest per capita density of Lamborghini dealerships in the entire nation in this particular area. And that was something that was really thoughtful, that increased trust with a potential tenant, and they were able to get that lease signed because of that. So use those objections. They can be your best friends. Okay, so before we get into the demo, I'm going to pause for a second. I'd love for you guys to put in the chat what stood out to you today. What did you need to hear? Was it thoughtfulness? Was it no pressure, no diamonds? Contextualize? Or was it something from the model, gravity, demand, or trust? Let me know what stood out to you, and you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Contextualize. Nice. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so we just talked a little bit about the model for creating a breakthrough story for a location. Next, I want to share how PersonAlive can accelerate that process for you and help that client understand the value of your location and sign more deals. But before we get into PersonAlive, I just want to give you a little bit of context. I just talked about contextualization, didn't I? Let's talk about the rise of foot traffic data. So this is Google Trends research for mobile foot traffic data. In 2015, it was like a blip on the radar, and we're sitting here right about peak interest in foot traffic data. And there's, for good reason, right? That's really useful. Like, one, you can determine a true trade area where you couldn't before. That's great, by the way, if you're getting competition vibes for understanding the cannibalization or the potential overlap in competitor trade area. And it also gives us estimated visitor counts, which can be really helpful in understanding a center, because obviously not all tenants are willing to share their actual sales data. But increasingly, tenants and property owners have begun to ask the question, who are the people behind the devices that are visiting our property? So what options do we have for answering that question? So we could use census data to help people understand the demographics behind the devices that are visiting the property. But remember, this is median demographics. So this is looking at the median of that census block group. You might have high-income people, low-income people in that block group. And so the centroid or the median of those two is neither true about either, right? So one way we can bring that a step up is psychographic data. And this is the study of people based on what they live. So you can look at demographic clusters of people, apply survey data to those folks to understand what they might do. This is where we saw an opportunity with PersonAlive geosocial data, which geosocial is a study of people based on what they actually do. What do I mean by what they actually do? Well, let me do a little demo for you of the PersonAlive segmentation. So this is the PersonAlive platform. PersonAlive is a segmentation of US households, and we classify every household into one of 17 groups of segments and 80 behavioral segments. based on three factors. Factor one is demographics, age, income, marital status. Factor number two, and this is getting into the behavioral, is where their mobile device goes. Are they going to high-end retail, low-end retail, or budget retail? And the last is social media. What do they follow? So those three factors go into a segmentation, and it creates a segmentation that is not only statistically more predictive of sales at an individual and trade area level, but it is also qualitatively more interesting because it's live and it's changing all the time. So this is our Midas Might segment. You can see age ranges, income ranges. You can see what they're talking about right now. But you're also able to see the top retailers that these people visit. So these people, for example, 7 times as likely to go to J. McLaughlin. Not based on surveys, it's where their devices have actually went. And they're 5 times as likely, almost 6 times as likely to go to Chop Creative Salad. So if you're looking at this and you're getting co-tenancy vibes, that would make sense because we're getting a good sense of the types of retailers these people over-index on visiting. So if you'll have a lot of these people in your trade area, Jay McLaughlin will probably do very well here. We got web visitation, channel preferences, and a household snapshot. And all this data is delivered throughout time. So you can see this in real time and you can compare retailers to one another throughout time. You can see the geographies where these folks show up. So we can see in Cincinnati where they make up the dominant folks in the census block group. And then you can see in-store visitation really blown out. So their top apparel visitation, we see these people 5 times as likely to visit Bonobos. If you are looking for a grocery anchor and you have these people on your trade area, these people are 4.7 times as likely to visit a Whole Foods market versus an average person in the US population. Brand influencers are the brands that they follow. So again, we see they not only visit Bonobos, they also follow Bonobos. See the restaurant brands they follow, top grocery brands, Whole Foods again showing up here. And then we have influencers. It's the top causes, so the top people they follow. If you're getting alignment vibes here with the types of causes these people care about, this is a great place to get that. And then we have demographic attributes of these people as well. Okay, so that is a quick demo of the segmentation. Let's bring the segmentation into action, and I'm going to do an example for Patagonia. So let's imagine you are a property owner and you just renovated this new site here in Bozeman, Montana, and Patagonia's tenant rep calls you up and say, hey, Patagonia is considering your location for opening up a new store. They're considering Bozeman. Would you be willing to talk? But you also find out that they're considering Billings, Montana as well, which is just right up the road. And then you see for these two locations, they're relatively demographically similar. So median income, Billings is a little higher. Median age, they're close. Billings is a little older. The concern that was shared with you by the Patagonia team is they're not certain that there's enough population in Bozeman, Montana to support a Patagonia store. And this is where we're not doing nearly as well compared to Billings. They have 86,000 versus 59,000. What are our options for showing the opportunity in this location and showing that potentially we have a better customer overlap in Bozeman with Patagonia? How do we think about doing that? So one thing we can do is we can look at their analog sites, and that is a place that I would start. So I've picked out their top 5 performing sites purely based on visitation. We don't know if it's their actual top 5 performing sites. And we all want to look at those trade areas in a 10-mile drive time to see what their demographics are. And we can see what we expected. The population across these other ones is a little higher, median income is a little higher, and we're right on the nose with age. So how can we show the difference between these two demographically similar locations? I'm going to show you how to do that on Persona Live. So we got 3 steps: append, analyze, activate. In this case, we're only doing 2. So append, we're appending our mobile data to find out the actual visitors to that location, and then analyze, ranking those visitors compared to Patagonia's visitors. So you can see I've already put in our top 5 Patagonias, but I'll just show you how you would do this. If you were working with a foot traffic provider, you'd hit foot traffic report and you would upload your foot traffic data there. But in this case, we're not doing that. So we can draw a custom polygon, and I'm going to put their Boulder, Colorado location in here. And all we need to do here is put a polygon around that Patagonia location and then ask for the most recent 12 months of data in that location. And I've already done that. And I've done that for Patagonia's top 5 locations, as well as our 2 prospective locations in Billings and Bozeman. So we can go to analyze those top locations and rank their top customer segments of people that are not just living in the trade area, but are actually visiting that location. So we can look at our Pearl Street location in Boulder, Colorado, and we see 17% of the visitors to that location are ultra wealthy families, young professionals, followed by sunset boomers. And then we can contrast that with the Patagonia, for example, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we can see that's dominated by young professionals. And if we look across their entire portfolio of high performers, we can see the high performing Patagonias are also dominated by young professionals being number 1, ultra wealthy families, number 2, educated urbanites, number 3. Now, here's the real question. 2 locations, demographically similar. Do they have different segments of people that are behaviorally different visiting them? Let's check it out. So we're going to go to our Billings location first to see, we want to see, do they have young professionals there? In our Billings location, we see no. In fact, it's dominated by blue collar suburbs, rural high income, and then wealthy suburban families. We saw this a little bit higher income, right? Versus our Bozeman location, dominated by young professionals. And that is really good news for us. So although these locations are demographically similar, the types of people that are showing up to that location that are in that trade area, one of them matches Patagonia significantly. And if you just look at Patagonia's index across these segments, you can see the top 3 segments average 4.5 times as likely to visit Patagonia as the average person, versus the Billings location is actually 30% less likely to visit Patagonia as the average person. So this is a great opportunity for this Bozeman location to show, hey, there's some real value for your here Patagonia, even though we don't meet your population criteria. But that's just the beginning. Where this gets really powerful is with co-tenancy. So let's look at the co-tenants based on the number 1 segment going there. So we're at the 17 level group. We can cut down and get more granular, see which segments are driving that. So young professionals, young stars are part of this young professionals group, but specifically young stars make up 15% of the visitors there. And we can get a sense of who these folks are. And I'm going to look at their brand influence, see what brands they follow. And we want to see if these co-tenants are already there driving gravity to this location. So we see top apparel brands, Everlane, Bonobos, Warby Parker, Athleta, and Lululemon. Are those folks there? Let's go check it out. So actually, right down the street, there is an Athleta. And then following closely afterwards is a Lululemon. So that's giving us an indication that these brands already know these folks are there and are committing to that location. What about their in-store visitation? Let's go check that out and see if we can find some other valuable co-tenants. Here we see their top apparel visitation. So these might be competitors or they might be synergistic. We can see these people are, their number 4 actually is Patagonia overall for visiting. So that's great. But we can also look at the top fitness visitation. We see these people over index on going to bar and yoga. So we want to see if that is there. Top grocery visitation, Whole Foods, National Co-op Grocers. Top hotel visitation, if there's an element nearby, that's good. So let's go check that out. So we look at the top grocery visitation right down the street. This is awesome for Patagonia. There's a National Co-op Grocers, which is an independently owned grocery store. So that definitely fits. and the top fitness visitation. Literally adjacent, and this is on the same property and the same parcel, adjacent to that open location is a pure bar, which is great because we already know 4 times as likely to go to a bar and just group fitness in general. And once I saw this is actually what sold me to like, yeah, Patagonia should totally check this location out. Across the street from this open location, there's this Element by Weston. And the windows that you're seeing actually look at this open location. And so not only are the people that live there Patagonia segment, but the people that are flying in and are the tourists are also Patagonia's segment. So this is an awesome opportunity to get eyeballs in the right context of geographically a very outdoors location for Patagonia. And co-tenancy is a place where Persona Life can really help and sing. So they're essentially surrounded by co-tenants. I'm going to finish up with a case study, and we can do some Q&A here at the end. I think a really good example of using Persona Live well is Brixmore through our partner Retail Stat. They had an open location, empty anchor that they were looking to get a specialty organic grocery store anchor in that location. And the potential tenant they were talking to, saw that they met their demographic criteria, but definitely did not exceed their demographic criteria. And so they're sort of balking at the opportunity of putting their brand in that location. But they were able to show that these people meet your demographic criteria, but they also way over index on going to Whole Foods and are interested in the things that your customers are interested in. And there's a really good quote here by the head of national accounts for Brixmore, where they said, hey, these people are following things on social media like Athleta, Fresh Market, Sprouts. They're visiting Bar 3 and Cycle Bar. And they were able to use this deep understanding of the people that actually live in the area by their behavior to help that tenant get over the hump and sign a lease. That new grocery is going to be opening up in 2024, and it's going to be transformational for that tenant, for the asset, and for the community, which is really exciting. So just a recap here, demographics, not the whole story. You can break through with that story model that I shared with you. Mobile data helps you tell that story, but mobile data plus Persona Live accelerates the deal. And what I want to share and offer with you guys today is anybody that has joined and stayed on to the end, thank you for doing that. 5 free Polygon reports. So when I showed you the Patagonia location, you can get 5 free of those, and 3 one-on-ones with our team working with us. This usually costs money. We're giving it for free just because you stuck on to the webinar. And we are also making that offer good across all of our partners as well. So if you're working with Placer or Retail Stat or SiteZeus or Calibrator, Carto or SiteWise, Esri, Pinpoint, Unicast, we'll also honor that for sticking on this webinar. I would love to do some Q&A with you guys. Jimmy, would you mind pulling up a few questions?
Yeah. So we got a couple. The first one, I know we talked about this a little bit, but maybe you could elaborate more on how a retailer would use this data.
Sure. That's good. Actually, it gets me to do the schedule demo. So let me give you an example of a retailer. And it's actually, if you need to schedule a demo, you can hit this right here. I think a really good example of a retailer that has used this is Sequest. They're an aquarium with 14 different locations. And what they're able to do is they don't need mobile data. They upload their customer data, match that customer data, see who their top segments are by location and who their top segments are by how much they spend. And they could use that for identifying the top segments and finding new locations. They're not expanding. The way that they actually use it, they use it for marketing. So they identified their top segment. They thought it was moms that were their main customer segment. They found a third of their customers were actually singles. So they created a date night package, and that's been their number one selling ticket package for that brand. And they actually use that for marketing as well. So they'll target those people on Facebook.
Yeah, super cool story. Another one is I work with Placer. How would I go about getting this?
Okay. Yeah. If you work with our partners, you just need to contact your sales rep over there or your account rep, and they can get you hooked up. It's an add-on to their platforms.
Cool. How do you define the trade area for Bosman?
So the way that we defined the trade area in that case, I used Esri's 10-minute drive time as the trade area for the demographics. The way that we did the segmentation is we actually looked at the segments of the visitors. We're not really using a trade area there. If someone came from 30 miles away, we are segmenting that person. So that's how you got those counts.
And then looks like we have one that is from Sean. He said, is there a reason you have people draw a custom polygon for the building rather than link the address to an existing building polygon data set, such as the one in Overture Maps data?
Yeah, no particular reason. So if you are using Overture Maps data and you have mobile data, you can actually just upload that if you want to. And we can bulk upload those mobile data pieces and add your own address to that, and it will give you the same information. If you're not working with a mobile data provider, that's when you might want to do polygons. And we do that because we have some customers like the Cherry Blossom Festival that actually are tracking parades, which is not a POI, it's not an address, it's actually like a space, or urban planning that might be looking at a like a public use space. So that's why we use the polygon method.
Cool. I think that's all the questions we have right now. If you guys
Cool.
have other ones, feel free to contact us. I assume, Lyden, they can reach out to you directly with your email.
Yeah, absolutely. And go to spatial.ai/schedule demo. It was the page that I just showed you previously. And then you can jump in on the demo, talk with me about that. And then we can also offer you the benefits of joining the webinar.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.